If you're thinking about buying an investment home in the Austin area in 2024, this is the ultimate guide for you. You're not going to want to miss it. What's going on, y'all? It's Mason Bleasdell, your Austin real estate agent, and you're joining me in my work in progress, new home office to talk specifically about investment homes. So a home that's strictly going to be used as a rental. I talk to you guys every day. I sell a good number of investment homes every single year. Some folks who are local here, some folks who are out of state, and some who've never even been to Texas. I sold some a few years ago. Folks have never been to Texas. They've never even seen the house that they bought. And through all of that experience, I've put together a couple of points here in this video that I want to go over because there are a lot of misconceptions, just things I think a lot of people don't realize or haven't factored in when thinking about buying a rental home in the Austin area. So I've broken this down into three main points, and I'm going to throw one little last mindset thing in here. And in these points, I'm going to get specific. I'm going to show you exact examples. I can only show averages for things, on YouTube. If you're curious about specific properties, reach out. I love talking about this stuff. Like I said, I'm pretty well versed in, just through experience, having seen so many different scenarios of folks with different rentals, different rental budgets, all of those things. This is not going to be tax advice. It's not going to be investment advice, but I want to give examples of things to think about if you're considering doing this in Austin. So let's jump right in. And one of the first things I want to talk about that so many people, especially my out-of-state folks, overlook when looking to buy a house in the Austin area is, they'll be crunching the numbers and they're really particular about HOA fees, keeping those in check, right? Because every dollar matters, especially when, as I talk about here in a little bit more in detail, most homes in Austin are going to be negative cash flow. The one thing that so many folks overlook is tax rate. Now, if you're familiar with Texas, you know that we have no state income tax, but money's got to come from somewhere. So the funding for schools, the funding for the county, etc., all comes from property taxes. So we do have some of the higher property tax rates anywhere you'll find in the country. Now, you'll also note, and I'm going to put a little example of this on the screen. You'll also note that property taxes, if you're doing research, don't follow like a city or a zip code. They are ambiguous. You can be in one master plan community where one part of it's a different tax rate from another. And it all falls in with what I'm showing you on the screen right now, different districting. So I'm gonna walk you through this. Don't look at the values too much. This is just a vacant lot that's owned by a builder. That's a good example of what I'm talking about. Now, one of the old adages is, well, if you're outside of city limits, you'll have lower property taxes. And that's not always true, but check this one out. This is a good example of that right here. So this is in Travis County. So of course you'll see the tax rate on the far right. You're in Lake Travis ISD, our independent school district. You'll see that tax rate over on the right column. Note for most of these, the ISD tax is going to be one of the highest individual tax rates that are put on that. This one is Travis County Hospital District because it's outside of city limits. You've got a lot of the extraneous county emergency services. So the hospital district, small tax on there. The ESD, Emergency Services District number 6, that this one falls in, another small little tax. That's your fire truck, your ambulance service, those kind of things. And then the big one, and this is one, mud taxes vary hugely, I mean massively. But this is a really good example of one to be aware of. So a MUD, a municipal utility district, is, it's complicated beyond what I'm going to dive into in this video, but think of it more as like a private utility company that is a taxing authority. They go through, they provide taxes to more rural areas. Like for example, this lot is in a community called Sweetwater in Southwest Austin. It's outside of city limits, so there's no city provided utilities. They bring water, wastewater, all of those things out there. They are of course a taxing authority. You can see that they've got a pretty substantial tax rate on there, and that totals up to a 2.45%. The 2.45 isn't even that bad for the Austin area, but almost 0.9% for just the mud tax alone can make a massive difference on cash flow. And these property taxes, maybe there's some deduction. Please talk to a tax professional. Honestly, if you have a rental home, I really think you should hire somebody to do those, but just be aware, if you're looking at cash flow, make sure that Again, they can be different in the same community. Make sure you don't just hone in on one spot and forget to check some of these things. They can make a massive difference on your cash flow every month. And I want to show you this bigger chart here, just giving an example of how much of a difference that can make. So I've got 3 different scenarios here. It's a $500,000 purchase price, 25% down payment. That's pretty customary to get good interest rate terms. And if we look down, all of these are identical, except for the total monthly payment. And you'll notice that's because the property taxes vary. So on the leftmost column, I've got a property tax rate of 1.75. In the middle column, I've got a 2.3%, and on the far right, I've got a 2.6% column. You can see it's almost a $400 difference between the 1.75 and the 2.6 tax rate. If you're, and that's every month. If you're calculating cash flow, $400 can make a huge swing. Well, negative cash flow, it could double your negative cash flow, for example. So this is something to really be aware of. If you aren't super familiar with Texas, if you haven't done a deep dive into property taxes, make sure you check that out. Make sure you've got, you're well researched before you make a move. Make sure your real estate agent's watching out for things like that. That really is one of the most overlooked things, especially my out-of-state folks. I don't think, in my experience, 9 out of 10 folks, overlook just how dramatic of a difference this can make. One of the other little notes that is Texas specific, that again, a lot of my out-of-staters don't realize, is condos. Now, in the Austin area, there are a lot of condo projects, and you'll note in the legal description, you're looking at a picture of a single family home. You're not sharing any walls. You do actually own the land, but the legal description is condominium, with a small percentage ownership in the common areas. In Texas, the definition between a condo community and a single family home HOA are all down to a whole bunch of small nuances, like lot size, like access, for impervious coverage purposes. Anyways, it's not your traditional high-rise condo versus detached home. There's a lot of nuance to it. Honestly, again, it's way more than I'm gonna go into in this video, but be aware with the different levels of power that a condo HOA versus a single family HOA has. And, I use this as an example. For example, I've sold a couple of single family detached, you own your own lot, but in condo communities. Now, the HOA restrictions on those communities, if you're familiar, you're doing research, you know that most HOAs will restrict against short-term rentals. That's very, very common. Basically, no HOAs allow for them these days, but condos can actually have restrictions against long-term rentals of any kind. So just be aware. I've seen condo communities that only allow 25% of the units in there to be rented. So you've got to put your name down for a permit, and that permit can either be a lottery system. Sometimes it's first come, first serve. So, you're back in line. There are sometimes some loopholes around this. I'm not an attorney. Check into those if like LLCs, for example, can sometimes do. But be aware, if you're looking at a condo, in the resale contract that we use in Texas, there is a contingency to allow a buyer to review the HOA documents. Once they come back from the title company as the most certified, up to date. Be aware and please read those. No, they're not super interesting, and if you're looking to fall asleep, they're probably great reading material, but checking the rental restrictions can be literal make or break. You could buy a house that you can't rent because the HOA will not allow you to, and HOAs have foreclosure rights here. So, if you're breaking their rules long enough and you don't stop, they can pursue a lot of legal actions against the house. Just avoid that entirely. Make sure you do due diligence. Don't not buy a condo because some can be really great, but just make sure you check on all those restrictions, make sure you know what you're buying. Now, the last big thing I really want to check in on is, people's perception of rentals. Now, there are a lot of people out there, whether it's social media content, whether it's Bigger Pockets, for example, that talk about buying a house, doing a BRRRR method, cash flow, setting yourself up for retirement. And a lot of those things are really great. And I'm not saying that they're not true. However, there are some differences depending on what parts of the country that you are in. And Austin, for example, is a more expensive market. And like we talked about earlier in the video, the property taxes here are pretty darn substantial. And it's not something to overlook. For example, if you own a $400,000 house with a 2% tax rate, you're paying $8,000 a year in property taxes. $8,000 can be 5 months worth of rent, in some cases 4 months worth of rent, totally wiped out, money you'll never see, it's not put into equity, it's just in property taxes. So it's also not linear. You'll note too, I've got some folks, they reach out to me and, they're looking to reallocate some of their investment funds. They want to diversify, they want to put into real estate. They've seen that Austin has outperformed most any other city in the country in terms of appreciation growth, at least historically, and that's what they want to do. So they'll call me up, hey, I've got $1 million budget. This is what I'm looking for. Mason, what do you think? Should I buy two $500,000 houses? Should I buy one $1 million house? Maybe three $300,000 houses? Anyhow, I want to show you just a little bit. I want to put a seed in. There are a whole lot of different variables in this. There's a lot of different strategies with it, whether it's whether you're trying to maximize cash flow to pay the house off as fast as possible, whether you're, purchasing in cash and you care about a good location because you want to keep vacancy down as low as possible. But anyhow, I'm going to show you 3 different examples. These are actual examples of communities. I did choose these communities specifically because they're large enough communities that I can pull enough data to give a good average. And they've been around long enough that I can pull data from 10 years ago. So not necessarily like ones to invest in, but these are really good examples spread around the Austin area that can just show you like what some of the strategies can be if you're looking to invest here. So first one here I'm going to put on the screen is Chaparral Crossing. Now this is a community that is just north of the new Tesla Gigafactory. Obviously that's been one of the biggest caveats to growth in Austin, especially in the investment market. So many folks are employed there, so much demand for rentals nearby. It's also outside of city limits, and in that particular area tends to be very low property taxes. So Chaparral Crossing can be a good example, and I've actually sold in there a couple of investments of maximizing that purchase price for cash flow. So check this out. The average 3-bedroom home over the last year was listed for $291,000. In the last year, the average 3-bedroom home in that community rented for $1,843. 10 years ago, in 2014, throughout the entire year, the average 3-bedroom home sold for $130,000. Again, one of the big overlooked things is appreciation in Austin. Now, can we know what the future is? Of course not. That's part of the risk of investing. But just interesting data point I wanted to put in there. And then if we look at a loan scenario, let's assume a full purchase, at $291,000, putting 25% down, assume a 7% interest rate, rates fluctuate, but that's a good example. You'll see monthly payment fall in at $2,002 after we factor in things like property taxes and insurance. Again, these are just estimates, but it's a good idea just to kind of show that linear. We were talking about how you would allocate $1 million, for example. This is an interesting one. This is pretty close to a net even cash flow. Still a little bit negative. Of course, there's some tax advantages to owning a rental home. Talk to a good CPA, but interesting data point. Now check this out. Mayfield Ranch, a nice large master plan community in the Round Rock area. We'll use this one as an example because this is a very low property tax area. So check this out. The average for 3-bedroom home for sale in the last year was $514,000. The average 3-bedroom home rented for $3,299 over that last year. And the average 3-bedroom home that sold 10 years ago in 2014 sold for $251,000. Again, it's that appreciation as your game plan. And if we take a look here, this is when you'll start to note, it's close, but getting a little bit more negative. So for example, total payment here came out to about $3,594. Just an interesting data point. My last example, this is showing a higher tax area. This is the Sweetwater community that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the mud. And I just want to show you how much of a difference that can make in terms of negative cash flow. Now, that is a higher priced community. I'm going to pick a 4-bedroom house because there's a good number to choose from in there that are in that range just for this example. So the average 4-bedroom home listed for $784,000 over the last year. Now, obviously, there's a good range. This is an average, but it's a good average to work from. Now, the average 4-bedroom home in the last year in that community rented for $3,700 a month. In 2014, the average sales price for a 4-bedroom in Sweetwater was $474,000. Super interesting to look at these numbers. Now check this out, this purchase scenario. Let's assume you're putting 25% down on a $784,000 house with that tax rate. Check out that total payment. Now you can see a little bit more what I'm talking about, how much of a difference tax rate can make. You're paying $1,600 a month in property taxes for a home like that with a 2.45% approximate tax rate. So needless to say, these are really great examples. For the example of, a buyer who's looking to allocate $1 million towards purchases in the Austin area, my best suggestion, let's find $300,000-$400,000 homes, up to 5. Again, depends on the strategy, depends on if it's an all cash purchase, depends on if it's a loan purchase. If it's an all cash purchase and we want to keep vacancies down as low as possible, there are some areas I would suggest. There's also, some areas I would suggest if we're just trying to maximize cash flow, and it's probably going to be some of the lowest property tax areas too. So just things to think about. So anyhow, to wrap up, I just want to make sure, going into it with the right expectation. Yes, you're going to be negative. Of course, there are different tax advantages and stuff for it, but talk to a good CPA for that. Anyhow, going into it the right expectation is really good. And that leads me on to my very last point as well. One of the very first questions I ask when you guys will reach out to me and, go, hey Mason, I'm thinking about buying an investment home. One of the very first questions that I ask is, what is your plan? Are you younger and you're looking to retire in 30 years? And in that 30-year retirement, you want to pay off the house, have it cash flow for you as a retirement vehicle? Are you looking to invest in the house? You want to sell it more short-term, maybe 5 to 10 years, depending on where that market cycle goes. What's your real plan? And if you're on the shorter end of that plan, one of the biggest pieces of advice I try to give to my clients is, find an area of growth. But in areas in Austin, we really don't have a ton of land problems. Like California, for example, you got mountains on one side, you got ocean on the other. In Austin, especially a lot of the suburbs, for example, Georgetown, Hutto, Hutto's exploded with the introduction of the new Samsung plant, for example. Hutto is flat farmland. There is a ton of space to continue to build homes in. And if you're thinking a little bit more short term, if you're thinking you might sell this in the next 5 to 10 years, one of the things I try to be aware of is tell my clients, hey, put yourself in the position of a buyer, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. If you're looking for a house to choose from when you go to liquidate this property, and there are a bunch of new construction options for sale, there's some resale options for sale, why would somebody choose your resale home over a new one? The new one's gonna have warranties, it's gonna be totally spotless, ready to move into and turn into your own. Whereas a resale, probably needs some touch-up paint, some of the appliances may be dated at that point, and it'll need a lot of money to refresh. Needless to say, the 2 reasons why you would pick a resale is something really specific and special about the lot it sits on, its location. Maybe it's directly across from the amenity center and you can't go buy that necessarily in a new construction, or it's cheap. And if you're an investor, we want the cheap when we buy. We don't want the cheap when we go to sell. So just be aware, if you're looking in a lot of the places that have, a lot of space that they're gonna be developing for a long time, make sure to consider that too. I've worked with some listings in communities where you can still go buy brand new homes from builders in the neighborhood. They're a hard one to sell, again, unless there's something super unique about it. So just a last little tidbit, my thoughts on something to just think about if you're looking to buy, especially in some of the suburbs around Austin. But if this video is helpful for you, if you are trying to invest in Austin and you want an agent who can think through these things with you, help you try to make the best decision we can, and at least get a darn good house to give us a good chance, I would love to be that resource for you. Reach out anytime. My personal contact info will be on the screen. That reaches me directly, and it'll be down below as well. But thanks for watching. I sure hope this was valuable to you if you're looking to invest in Austin, and I will see y'all next time. Take care.